Catastrophic defeat for Labour in an area it has held since the 1930s. Humiliation for UKIP, who failed to win in the crucible of Brexit, but vindication for Theresa May?
After his result, how about a general election? Are you still in favour of a general election, Mr Corbyn, like you were last year?
Just one of the questions that Jeremy Corbyn refused to answer today. Good evening. In theory, by-elections are supposed to be opportunities for the opposition to shine and the government to get a bloody nose. In practice today, something quite extraordinary happened. Labour lost a seat in Copeland it had held since before the Second World War. It did so despite hammering the Tories' open wound, its handling of the NHS. But Jeremy Corbyn soldiers on regardless. He has company. UKIP also had a bad night. They failed to gain a seat in the heartland of Brexit. And if they can't win in Stoke, where can they win? And Theresa May may spend the weekend pondering whether this is the moment to strike and call for an early general election.
Also on tonight's programme, North Korea's ballistic missile launch grabbed global attention, but now it's claimed the rogue state also let loose a weapon of mass destruction to kill the leader's half-brother, the nerve agent, VX. This is how another mercurial Asian leader, the Philippines' President Duterte, destroys his critics, detaining the opposition leader on charges she says are trumped up. And the state-owned Royal Bank of Scotland lost £7 billion last year, the 9th year in a row of losses. So why is its boss still optimistic?
Donald Trump's much-vaunted wall still exists mainly in his own mind.
And to begin the construction of a great border wall.
But the threat to build it and get Mexico to pay for it has already had a dramatic impact on the border. We've been out with the Border Patrol.
The last few months, our numbers have decreased quite a bit. We've heard that the smugglers are charging more money.
Snatching catastrophe from the jaws of defeat. Jeremy Corbyn has resisted the growing clamour for him to step down after Labour's humiliating result in Copeland, an area it has held for decades. Mr Corbyn says he's determined to carry on, but critics say that he's now an obstacle in the party's way. There was some consolation when Labour managed to hold on to Stoke-on-Trent, seeing off UKIP's challenge, but there's much despair on the Labour benches. More from Fatima Manji in Copeland in a moment. First, our political correspondent, Michael Crick, is in Stoke. Michael.
Well, Matt, these were extraordinarily good results for the Conservatives. They took Copeland on a swing of almost 7%. And here in Stoke-on-Trent, they also increased the Conservative share of the vote. Now, most Prime Ministers, after two such good results, would spend the weekend at Chequers with their advisers, contemplating the idea of a snap election to give Theresa May a personal mandate to increase her majority in the Commons and give her another 5 years. Mrs May has always been adamant she won't do that. But these results leave Labour very vulnerable. They're 18% behind in the polls. This is only the fourth occasion since the war an opposition party has lost a seat in a by-election. They're consoling themselves, though, that at least they think they've seen off UKIP in one of their heartlands.
Mr Corbyn appeared here in public for just 4 minutes, 27 seconds to salvage the one piece of good news.
Congratulations, Gareth. Wonderful result.
After his result, how about a general election? Are you still in favour of a general election, Mr Corbyn, like you were last year? After this victory in Stoke, surely you...
Are you responsible for Copeland?
After this victory in Stoke, presumably you'd like a general election?
It seems not. For last night's defeat to the Tories in Copeland, much heavier than Labour feared, was the worst by-election for an opposition since the war.
We've had Labour here for more than 80 years. But it's been very clear, talking to people throughout this campaign, that Jeremy Corbyn doesn't represent them.
And it's extraordinary, a former advisor to Gordon Brown said today, that Theresa May doesn't call a snap election. She won't, it seems, but did visit Copeland today to milk the result.
Labour have held this seat since the 1930s. A party in government hasn't won a by-election from the opposition, in a seat held by the opposition, for 35 years.
Copeland was disappointing, Jeremy Corbyn said in London earlier, but he wouldn't take any blame.
Have you, at any point this morning, looked in the mirror and asked yourself this question: could the problem actually be me?
No.
Why not?
Thank you for your question.
Later in Stoke, it was all about their decisive victory over UKIP.
What we have shown and shown you all, that when we are united and committed and determined, we will win elections. And that is exactly what we're going to do.
So perhaps there should be a general election then? How about
You're
that?
very persistent, aren't you?
Above all, it was a message that hope triumphs over fear.
But many other Labour MPs acknowledged Labour faces a huge battle to win an election whenever it occurs.
What we've got to do is to learn profound lessons from that victory, and also what happened in Copeland, because we've got an enormous amount.
And you'd lose a general election,
to rebuild trust and confidence.
Copeland is an awful result for Labour, and we really need to acknowledge the depth of the problem. From my own campaigning in Copeland, one of the most significant challenges is the leadership of the party.
But Jeremy Corbyn wasn't the only leader in Stoke today avoiding questions. A month ago, Paul Nuttall looked set to take this seat, showing UKIP's new stress on winning working-class voters cheesed off with Labour. But then this programme revealed Mr Nuttall had claimed on his nomination forms he was living at this empty house in Stoke, which he admitted to us he'd never visited. An apparent electoral offence.
Didn't you make serious mistakes in this campaign, Mr Nuttall?
Oh, come on.
Well, there was the house, the website. I mean, you were winning this campaign. I don't know why your people are hauling me away.
I'm not
I only want to ask you a question or two.
Look, come on, lads. Let's go. Let's come on. We just didn't get enough votes, Michael, and that's it.
Yeah, but isn't that because of you?
No, it's not because of me. Look,
I mean, wouldn't Nigel Farage have done better?
No chance. No, not at all.
No chance.
No.
Then there was Hillsborough. Nuttall had had to admit that for 6 years his website had wrongly claimed that close friends of his had died in the disaster.
If that stuff was on your website for 6 years.
But Michael, that was a mistake. That was a mistake. It was put up by a press officer. I didn't know it was there, and I'm very sorry, and I apologise for it. But let's put this in context. I haven't stolen money from the public purse.
No, but you've made a false declaration about the house.
That's not false declaration.
You made two false declarations about the house. You made a false declaration that you were living at the house at the time of the nomination. And you made a false declaration that you were living at the house at the time you declared as a voter, surely.
No, I didn't.
Well, who made the declarations then?
No, I didn't.
Staffordshire Police told me tonight they're still investigating that. UKIP's Stoke headquarters this morning was daubed with graffiti, but members try to put a brave face on things.
We'll keep gaining ground until we do end up in Westminster. And if we don't end up in Westminster as the governing party in 2020, which I honestly believe that we can, we will be the opposition party.
UKIP knew this was their great chance to show the party has a future beyond the Brexit referendum and beyond Nigel Farage. Indeed, Farage himself said this by-election was fundamental.
Now, these results were really bad for UKIP, but worse for Labour. But Labour MPs last summer, after their disastrous attempt to unseat Jeremy Corbyn, took the decision they weren't going to voice criticisms of Mr Corbyn in public. And that's been largely reflected today. But make no doubt about it, their anxieties about the Corbyn leadership are stronger than ever. But interestingly, I've always felt that what's more likely to happen is that Corbyn's leadership could be brought to an end by trade union leaders. And interestingly today, Dave Prentice, the leader of Unison, a union that backed Corbyn, and Mr Prentice regards himself as a friend, has come out and given what he describes as a final warning. He says that Stoke was never a seat where the result should have been in doubt. Copeland, he says, was disastrous. Labour, he says, has not moved an inch nearer to Downing Street in the last 5 months. that the party is sliding towards irrelevance. Now, Mr. Prentice says it's wrong to place the blame solely on Jeremy Corbyn, but Corbyn must take responsibility and turn things round.
Michael, thank you very much indeed. Well, UKIP's former leader, Nigel Farage, was an ocean away speaking to American conservative activists outside Washington, D.C. today, hailing the start of what he called a great global revolution. More from there in a moment. But earlier I spoke to Mr. Farage and asked whether the failure to win the Stoke seat was a fundamental failure for his party.
It's been a very disappointing night. We didn't get it right, and that means we don't make the next big step up right now. However, bear this in mind, there are still millions of UKIP supporters and voters out there, and what we've got to do as a party now is bide our time whilst this Brexit process goes through, and I think will lead probably to many disappointments, and to analyse, what we didn't quite get right in this by-election.
What exactly do you think went wrong? Because in this particular seat in Stoke, 69.4% of the people voted for Brexit. This was Brexit heartland. This was low-hanging fruit for you, and you failed to pick it.
What we didn't succeed in doing was in getting Conservative voters to vote tactically for UKIP to beat Labour. And I suspect that what's happening right now is that Theresa May is riding on a wave of support because she's given a couple of big speeches on Brexit in which she said Brexit means Brexit.
But was the candidate also a problem?
Well, I can't think of anybody in politics who hasn't at some point been embarrassed by something that has been said or put out in their name. And that was tough, and that was difficult, and it's been rough for Paul. But, be in no doubt, I do think he's absolutely the right person to lead UKIP, and he must continue.
Is the problem here for UKIP that you don't know in which direction to turn? Because what it says on the UKIP tin, in other words, to leave the EU, is already happening. So what is the point of your party?
Well, I do think there is one big area that UKIP needs to own, and I'm not sure that we're being clear enough on it, and that is the question of immigration. We've just had the figures out. 74,000 people from Romania and Bulgaria alone came into the country over the course of the last year. I fear that after Article 50 gets triggered, that may well lead to really huge numbers of people coming into Britain from the European Union. UKIP needs to be clear and own the immigration argument. Now, there are some in the party who want us to run away from that argument, who feel awkward and embarrassed by it, and I'm suggesting we don't. I'm suggesting we own it.
So is the only way that you can get elected to the Houses of Parliament is to go as far on the immigration path as Donald Trump has gone in America? Is that the only solution for your party to actually occupy seats?
Well, given that it's the #1 issue in British politics and the biggest concern to people, if we could own that issue, that wouldn't be a bad place to be.
Do you think that what Trump has done regarding immigration in the United States should be something that you or your party would advocate in Britain?
Well, should we have strong vetting? Should we make sure that we're a place that illegal immigrants can't come? Should we have a proper, balanced system where we take good people in from around the world? Absolutely. That's exactly what we should be doing. And I think maybe UKIP has slightly lost ownership of this argument.
You call it strong vetting, he calls it extreme vetting. So which one is it?
Doesn't matter as long as it stops terrorists coming in.
What about the ban on Muslim visitors from some countries? Do you agree with that? Is that something that you would want to see in the UK?
Well, I'm sorry, that's an outrageous distortion.
That is exactly what he's doing. That's what he's called it. Do you think that's a good idea or not?
It's not a ban. This is a total misrepresentation. What Trump has tried to do is for a period of 90 days to put a temporary halt on whilst he works out whether the vetting policies are right or not. And I think we should look at ourselves and our own hypocrisy in the United Kingdom. We condemn Trump for trying to do that, and we turn a complete blind eye to 16 countries in the world that ban Israeli Jews from going there.
But just to be clear, Nigel Farage, whatever you want to call it, what Trump is doing in America, what he is trying to do at the moment, you think is a good idea, and you think we should try and do it in the UK?
I think we should do everything we can to stop terrorists coming into Britain, do everything we can to stop people who fought in Syria and been brutalised in that conflict, coming back to Britain. And only this week, you know, a British person became a suicide bomber out in Mosul. We must do everything we can to stop that from happening. This is not based on religion, it's not based on loathing, it's based on common sense and trying to make your own communities as safe as possible.
Nigel Farage talking to Matt earlier. Well, in Copeland, where Theresa May hailed what she called the Conservatives' astounding victory, Labour's recriminations are only just beginning. Branded out of touch with working people, what really lay behind their defeat? Was it Jeremy Corbyn, Brexit, or a wider malaise among the electorate? Fatima Manji is in the constituency. Fatima.
Kathy, we're in the most remote parliamentary constituency in England. You can feel the physical isolation. Thanks to some poor road and rail links, it takes a long time to get anywhere. And perhaps that's part of the reason why voters feel ignored by parties, both parties, Conservative and Labour. For Labour in particular, though, what has that meant? We've had a bizarre situation today where I've spoken to some voters who previously voted Labour who said they were engaging in a protest vote and trying to shake things up locally by actually voting for a Conservative government. Other Labour-inclined supporters said they didn't feel motivated to turn out to vote at all. Now, it has to be said that the Labour vote share has declined here in previous elections, but this time something has gone horribly wrong for the party.
Astounding, extraordinary, historic. It was superlative galore for the Tories this morning. But then, having achieved a rare government win in a by-election, it's no wonder the Prime Minister couldn't stop smiling.
That this is truly a wonderful victory for the Conservative Party, but also for the people of Copeland.
She stood in the shadow of a statue built to remember the area's iron ore mining heritage, perhaps a signal to show the Conservatives forging a new relationship with working class voters.
Not since 1935 has this area been represented by a Conservative. The Prime Minister sees this as a vindication for her policies. It's no wonder she's looking so triumphant.
What a contrast to the scene in the early hours. Labour's candidate mute in defeat, no concession speech and no willingness to answer questions either.
Ms Troughton, do you blame Jeremy Corbyn for your loss?
Leaving one of her campaign coordinators to claim the party had actually fared rather well.
And at a time when the Labour Party were between about 15 and 18 points behind in the polls, the fact that we've pushed the Tories this close in this by-election against all the odds just shows how deeply felt the issue of the NHS services in West Cumbria really is.
Labour's campaign here focused on the closure of maternity services at the local hospital, which would leave people having to travel 40 miles, often through rural country roads. Yesterday we asked voters their top concern.
The hospital, really, yes.
The hospital?
The hospital, yeah. Save our services.
Yeah, maternity ward, big issue.
The hospital more to me, like.
And yet Labour still lost. With 10,000 people employed at Sellafield, the Tories seized the opportunity to highlight Jeremy Corbyn had spent 30 years campaigning against nuclear power, though he has now changed his mind.
We need the stronger economy, the improved infrastructure and the better services. And we also need nuclear. And Jeremy Corbyn's views on nuclear have been mentioned time and time again on the doorstep.
And you think that's what voters really decided on?
As I say, I think it was a multitude of reasons, but nuclear is our backbone.
But beyond the nuclear issue, there is another consistent pattern here: disengagement. So many who might lean towards Labour talk of not feeling inspired enough to actually go and vote.
I don't know, because they're not doing a lot for the community. Well, I don't think any of them are, with the room tax and everything else, unemployment. They don't help people.
How do you feel about Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, I think he's a very difficult man to read. You know, I think he's leading the Labour Party in the wrong direction.
It's just a bit unhinged over the last few years, the Labour Party, so I just think people have swung the other way in regards to that, really.
Do you think Jeremy Corbyn can stay as leader?
I don't know, I think he's going to struggle now.
The high drama of election night may be over, but Labour is left battered, unable to rely on its heartland. When even those whom the party was set up to represent won't elect it, just what will become of the Labour Party?
Well, joining me now is Labour's Shadow Attorney General, Baroness Shami Chakrabarti. Your Shadow Cabinet colleague, Kat Smith, described the Copeland result as an incredible achievement. Do you agree?
Well, colleagues of yours in the political media were telling me a week ago that we were going to lose both seats. And
so it's an achievement in that context,
well, I'm disappointed that we lost Copeland. We lost by 2,000 votes in difficult circumstances with the national polls, in difficult circumstances with this particular seat, with the nuclear industry on the one hand and concerns about the hospital on the other hand, in difficult circumstances because we've had civil war for too long in the Labour Party and disunited parties tend not to be popular with the voters.
So it's not the fault of Jeremy Corbyn, it's the fault of his disunited colleagues, is that right?
I watched Michael Crick's piece, as I always do, with great interest and I'm greatly entertained. But the analysis is pretty thin because he made it about Paul Nuttall and Jeremy Corbyn. I'm just so proud today that we beat UKIP because, as we saw in the subsequent interview with Nigel Farage, it's not about Nigel Farage being a great candidate and Paul Nuttall being a terrible one. It's about a quasi-fascist party that the people of Stoke voted against.
And that is Stoke, but in Copeland, the governing party won a by-election for the first time in 35 years. And Jeremy Corbyn should take responsibility for that loss.
Well, I think we all take collective responsibility because we are the Labour Party. But
does Jeremy Corbyn, as a leader, take responsibility? Because that's what leaders do, isn't it?
What I would say is that I was in Copeland knocking on doors, talking to people last weekend, and I've spoken to people on the phone. And my feeling is that Copeland is the kind of constituency that was taken for granted by the Labour Party for too long, over many years. And recently, and Kat will testify to this, young, enthusiastic activists have been getting stuck in Copeland and in Stoke and elsewhere and knocking on doors that haven't been knocked on for too long.
So it's the fault of his predecessors as Labour leader, is it?
It's not even about leaders. It's about representatives who used to weigh votes when they should have counted them. And they should have cherished them a bit more preciously.
But it is about leadership, isn't it? When Jeremy Corbyn is leading the party, you know, there's an NHS crisis, there are maternity services closing, and even despite that, Labour couldn't hold on to this seat.
It's not about... I genuinely don't believe that either the Stoke result or the Copeland result could be laid down to personalities. It's good for reality TV and it's good for TV, but it isn't the truth about why so many people have felt alienated and left behind in British politics.
So Jeremy Corbyn's got as long as it takes to turn it around.
Jeremy Corbyn has won 2 massive mandates in the most numerous political party in this country, possibly in Western Europe.
From the membership, but not the electorate. I mean, will he face a general election? Would you like him to face a general election sooner rather than later to put that to the test?
Because if we keep talking about the leadership, it's great for you guys, but it's really bad for the party and it's worse still for the country.
So you're saying bring it on for the general election, but the figures show today, Electoral Calculus, the analytical website, says that if there was a general election tomorrow, Theresa May would win a 3-figure majority.
Well, we will see whether... I noticed that an unnamed Gordon Brown former advisor was suggesting that perhaps Theresa May should do that. Of course, Gordon Brown famously didn't do that, and there are all sorts of reasons why unelected prime ministers like Gordon Brown and Theresa May might make that calculation.
But at the moment, you're heading for a crashing defeat.
At the moment, Theresa May is the acceptable face of a very uncertain Brexit, and Paul Nuttall is the unacceptable face. That is one thing, but she has no plan, and the people of Stoke and Copeland and people all over this country are likely to suffer.
Baroness Chakrabarti, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
Matt.
Thanks, Cathy. Now, the assassins of Kim Jong-nam, the half-brother of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, used the world's deadliest nerve agent to kill him. That's according to Malaysian police. The chemical VX is classified by the UN as a weapon of mass destruction. So far, the world has been focused on North Korea's potential nuclear threat. But now it seems there's evidence it's not afraid to use the chemical weapons it already has. Here's our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Jonathan Rugman.
It's 11 days since Kim Jong-nam told Malaysian police he'd been attacked in this airport. And today the country's police chief claimed the weapon was the deadliest chemical agent ever created.
It is the VX nerve agent, which is a chemical weapon.
You don't know how they were brought in?
No, we are investigating that.
the police chief was speaking inside Kuala Lumpur Airport himself, which still hasn't been decontaminated. The police have ordered a clean-up, but the airport says that isn't necessary, and you get the sense the authorities here are more relaxed than others might be in their place. That's probably because Mr. Kim's alleged attackers survived. 2 women from Indonesia and Vietnam are in custody.
VX is so toxic that if they touched it, it would be highly likely that they should succumb to it. Now, whether they were wearing some sort of protective clothing, we don't know, although the authorities are suggesting that is not the case. So it's a key unanswered question. One would expect them to have died, and one would expect to see many more casualties around the area as well.
One theory is that the women rubbed different compounds on Mr. Kim, which only became lethal mixed together on his skin, which might explain why 2 assassins were needed. VX is clear, tasteless and odourless, and therefore hard to detect. 1/3 of a drop of it, absorbed through the skin, can kill in minutes. It's feared North Korea may have up to 5,000 tons of a whole range of chemical weapons, the 3rd largest stockpile in the world after Russia and the US. North Korea test-fired this new missile just the day before the half-brother of its leader was assassinated. Put the 2 events together, and what you get is a terrifying redefinition of the country's potential threat, which isn't just nuclear, but chemical too.
It reminds everybody that North Korea possesses not just a nuclear threat, but extensive chemical weapons, and is prepared to use them. If North Korea is prepared to use VX in a crowded airport terminal, does anybody believe that they will blink before using it in a war?
If chemical experts confirm that the swabs from Mr. Kim's face do contain traces of VX, North Korea could be back on the list of state sponsors of terrorism. There'll be pressure on the UN Security Council to react after 6 rounds of sanctions already. And that will depend less on President Trump than on China, which already suspended coal imports from Kim Jong-un's dictatorship a few days ago.
I suspect that when the top people in China decide what to do about this flagrant use of VX in a crowded space, that North Korea will not be comfortable.
So Kim Jong-nam's killing is unlikely to remain an isolated incident, telling us as it does about a new kind of danger posed by one of the most isolated countries in the world.
Jonathan Rugman reporting. Well, I'm joined now from New York by Sumi Terry, a former CIA analyst on North Korea who also served as director for Korea and Japan at the US National Security Council. Sumi Terry, welcome to the program. I'm sure you heard Jonathan Rugman's report there, but I mean, there is a very alarming development here, isn't there, about the willingness to use chemical weapons by North Korea. What do we know about the extent of their stockpiles?
Well, as you've said, North Korea has very robust chemical and biological weapons program, some 5,000 tons of chemical weapons. It's just that in the West and in the United States, we've been so focused on North Korea's nuclear and missile capability that we have sort of ignored their very lethal chemical weapons program.
So they've got enough stuff to cause real damage if they wanted to use it?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
And willingness to use it, as you've seen.
As we've seen. Now, the other thing, of course, that we focus on obsessively, and perhaps rightly so, is their missile capability. Now, they just test-fired another medium-range missile the other day. It plonked into the Sea of Japan. But how much easier is it to marry a chemical warhead or a biological one to a missile than a nuclear one? How close are they to doing that?
I think they're pretty close, both for chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons. We don't know in the intelligence community for sure. We can't even say that they have not have that capability. We don't think so yet. That we think they have a capability to, for example, carry a nuclear to in short-term range and intermediate range. We don't think they have an intercontinental ballistic missile that could carry these things yet. But that's not conclusive. They may already possess this capability.
Now, in the Western media, in Hollywood, there's a tendency to kind of make fun out of the North Koreans, to think of Kim Jong-un as a bit of a joke. I mean, the joke is gone now, isn't it? And the one person who doesn't think that he's a joke is Donald Trump. But do you think that Trump is approaching North Korea in the right way, or might he make matters even worse?
Well, we don't know yet because I don't think they have finished or completed their North Korea review. Mr. Trump has said a number of things while he was campaigning, like we're going to make China make North Korea disappear and so on. But we don't know yet. They are in the middle of, Washington is in the middle of trying to finish the policy review. But I don't think they have decided yet on what they're going to do about North Korean problem.
But it's high time that they did decide, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think Kim Jong-un is not really helping the matters by doing this missile launch and then assassinating Kim Jong-nam using chemical weapons in a major international airport. Mr. Trump, while he was campaigning, on one hand also said that he is willing to meet with Kim Jong-un over hamburgers and so on. But I think that window for diplomacy, Kim Jong-un himself is closing it by these very provocative actions.
Looks like it, doesn't it? Sumi Terry, thank you very much indeed. Kathy.
Sure.
Thanks, Matt. Now, the era of empty talk is over, Donald Trump declared, promising to begin work on his campaign pledges and repeating his attacks on the media, this time claiming anonymous sources should be banned. The response? Resounding cheers from the conservative activists who wrote off his political chances just 12 months ago. But this was Donald Trump's moment of triumph at the Holy of Holies of America's Conservative Political Action Conference. Our Washington correspondent Kylie Morris was there. Kylie.
Kathy, there were standing ovations. I'm not sure about President Trump's boasting that people were queued back six blocks outside the building, but certainly there was enthusiasm in the room from what used to be, let's face it, the kind of ideological base of the Republican Party. President Trump ran through some of his more extreme lines on preventing terrorism, relating an anecdote about his friend Jim, who doesn't go to Paris anymore because the threat of Islamist terror looms too large. He talked more about the wall with Mexico, which we'll revisit shortly. And he talked through what he sees as his achievements so far. Now, interestingly, not everyone I spoke to was thrilled with his style of political theatre. Some expressed concern over the rolling out of the immigration ban, and certainly his position on free trade still grates for many. But even those people I met who didn't vote for him now seem willing to embrace him as their president. They do particularly like Mike Pence, the vice president, which I think is certainly worth watching. But for now, this felt the final moment in Donald Trump's takeover of the true believers.
Our president, Donald Trump.
In from the cold. A year ago, Donald Trump pulled out of CPAC and was mocked by the conservative base. But how that's all changed.
Great to be back at CPAC. It's a place I have really, I love this place. Love you people.
These people didn't always love Trump, but that was before November 8th, when he delivered the White House and gave conservatism a makeover.
The victory and the win was something that really was dedicated to a country and people that believe in freedom, security, and the rule of law. Our victory was a victory and a win for conservative values.
At times, it sounded like the speech of a candidate rather than a president, short on policy, big on promises. But many of his supporters like the start President Trump has made. What is the thing that he has delivered on that has made you convinced of his authenticity?
Well, his nomination of Judge Neil Gorsuch was huge. I mean,
to the Supreme Court.
He saved that.
One by one, we're checking off the promises we made to the people of the United States. One by one. A lot of promises.
One key promise that resonated in the room, gun rights and protection for the Second Amendment, a core conservative value.
Definitely the defense of the Second Amendment. It's really important in my family. Yes.
Gun rights.
Gun rights, gun control. So, you know, I'm from Connecticut.
Not so much gun control, though, more gun rights for you, I'm guessing.
Gun rights, but gun control as well, but without limiting our access to them.
But what about that other thing Conservatives used to love? Free trade, which the President promises to dissemble trade deal by trade deal. You booed?
When he was talking about being, you know, repealing the TPP and NAFTA and things like that, yeah, I did boo. I don't think that they're as detrimental as he thinks they are.
When Donald Trump first came to CPAC 6 years ago, he was still formulating his message, but the beginnings were clear enough.
The United States has become a whipping post for the rest of the world. The world is treating us without respect. They are not treating us properly.
Fast forward to today, and the isolationist doctrine of Donald Trump is a defining principle of his presidency.
There is no such thing as a global anthem, a global currency, or a global flag. This is the United States of America that I'm representing. I'm not representing the globe. I'm representing your country.
Things have come full circle for Donald Trump. Conservatives in America now in his slipstream. Now, on the issue of immigration, President Trump said it again today. We're building the wall, no doubt about it, way ahead of schedule in order to keep out bad dudes.
And remember, we are getting the bad ones out. These are bad dudes. We're getting the bad ones out. Okay? We're getting the bad. If you watch these people, it's like, oh, gee, that's so sad. We're getting bad people out of this country. People that shouldn't be, whether it's drugs or murder or other things. We're getting bad ones out. Those are the ones they go first, and I said it from day one. Basically, all I've done is keep my promise.
But what's happening right now along that 1,900-mile border to those who hope to follow their American dream and escape to a new life? Mexico has already said that they will not accept US deportees. Our Latin America correspondent Guillermo Galdos has been out with the US Border Patrol and finding that the situation along the border may already be changing.
Texas is where more migrants illegally cross into the US than anywhere along its southern border. 2 months ago, Marlene Castro's team was picking up hundreds of refugees and migrants every day. After President Trump's inauguration, the numbers have fallen.
That's what we call landings. That's the open spaces where people will gather or they'll actually wait to come into the United States. The last few months, our numbers have decreased quite a bit. We've heard that the smugglers are charging more money.
Castro is a first-generation immigrant.
Hola, señora. Hola. ¿Vienen juntos? ¿Los tres? ¿Usted no anda con él? I've got an adult and 2 minors.
She's patrolled this border for more than 20 years. The border whose security, including a wall, was one of Donald Trump's key campaign promises.
¿Cuánto pagó para venirse para acá? Okay, señora, el cartel controla todo México. No se vino sin ayuda. Tenía que haber pagado algo a alguien. No me eche mentiras. Ya tengo bastante tiempo haciendo esto. No me va a decir algo que no sé.
According to Trump, the wall's main job is to stop the flow of people and drugs into America.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Across the Rio Grande, his anti-immigration rhetoric seems to be having an impact.
In Mexico, there's a huge economy based on crossing people into the US. The business is run by the cartels who control the border and the people smugglers whose job it is to find the path into the promised land.
Ese hombre ha causado un impacto ahora sí que desde que entró mal.
Sergio spent a decade working as a people smuggler, transporting Central Americans across the border and making a small fortune in the process. Now the boom has turned to bust.
Yo tuve que conseguir un negocio aparte. Estoy trabajando de empleado, después siendo el jefe.
¿Por qué?
¿Por qué? Porque ya las personas, si me llegaban 20 en una semana, ahorita me llega 1 o 2. Ya casi no hay momentos para pasar. Ha aumentado bastante la vigilancia. Casi viene siendo el doble de vigilancia de lo que había antes. De hecho, hay más camionetas. Si tú pagabas $7,000, $8,000, ahorita te está en $10,000 o $12,000 hasta allá.
For those who make it into the US, the Sacred Heart Church in McAllen is often the first stop. In the past 2 years, volunteers at this Catholic mission in Texas have received tens of thousands of people. The majority are from Central America, who were smuggled across the border, then handed themselves into the US authorities. The mission provides food and clothing to refugees whose asylum cases are pending. Most are running from violence.
¿Por qué se venió justo ahora que Trump ha salido?
La necesidad. O sea, uno quiso llegar antes.
¿Y usted no tiene miedo de que Trump lo vaya a deportar o nada?
Ni modo, no arriesgaba todo.
At the end of last year, many people tried to cross into the US fearful of a Trump victory. Since January, that number has dropped.
Bueno, lo de las elecciones en noviembre y diciembre sí definitivamente se vio que hubo un aumento muy drástico de migrantes que llegaron aquí. Los números bajaron mucho.
En comparación de antes, ahora ¿cuántas familias están residiendo acá y cuántas
Ahorita
recibían?
tenemos un promedio aproximado de unos 50 aproximados al día. Y llegamos a tener hasta 433 en un día. En diciembre.
A few miles down the road is the Hidalgo International Bridge, which links the US and Mexico across the Rio Grande.
Gracias. Igualmente, señor. Gracias.
Crossing the bridge, Trump's aggressive deportation plans seem to be kicking in. Everyone here had just been dumped at the US-Mexico border. The government says it's targeting criminals, but more than a quarter of those deported in the last few weeks had no criminal record.
Los que lo estaban apoyando, la mayoría lo están regresando. Si tú ya no tienes quien te apoye ahí arriba, ¿cómo le vas a hacer si no tienes dinero para solventar?
Deported from the US, many migrants end up here in Reynosa, Mexico's most dangerous city. Some find space in this refuge, but have no money and no way to get home. Antonio and his daughter traveled from Honduras to ask the US for asylum, but were turned away at the border.
Que uno podía cruzar con sus niños para otro lado, pero no, llegamos aquí y los presentamos ahí al puente y nos dijeron de que no los podían procesar porque tenían mucha gente.
¿Ahora piensa que con Trump la cosa está bastante más difícil?
Sí, claramente, ahora está más difícil.
Applications for asylum in Mexico have soared since Trump was sworn in. Every day, like Antonio, hundreds more are doing the same.
Pues nosotros tenemos que ver el modo de cómo los pasamos, pero de que vamos a seguir pasando, vamos a seguir pasando. Eso nunca se va a acabar. Nunca, nunca.
It's almost 200 years since US troops moved south to annex Texas from Mexico. Now the flow of people north is changing US politics.
And we'll look, check and see if there's any refs anywhere around here.
In Texas, the president's plan to put America first is taking a hold.
And I'm surprised that there's nobody out here.
For now, it may be just a wall of words, but it seems to be working.
Guillermo Galdos reporting there. Oops, they did it again. Another multi-billion-pound loss for the 9th year in a row. In fact, the Royal Bank of Scotland lost £7 billion last year, more than 3 times the amount they lost in 2015. Yet the bank's chief exec, Ross McEwen, is still insisting things will get better, eventually. He's planning to slash costs by £2 billion over the next 4 years, including branch closures and job cuts. But will that be enough? Here's our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy.
Over a 35-year period, the Standish family built up the Bowplex business, becoming a familiar name on many British high streets. But in 2008, the credit crunch hit and the multi-million-pound business took a knock. Its bank, RBS, stepped in, allegedly to help. But things quickly went from bad to worse.
So as you can see, Bowplex is still a going concern.
Tristan Standish, one of the founder's sons, says the bank's global restructuring group cranked up their interest rates and, gradually, their control of his family's business.
During a credit crunch, a lot of businesses were in trouble. So do you go and charge them 3 times the market rate for interest? It's not going to help. My brother lost his business, he lost his house. I hope he doesn't mind me saying this. He suffered a nervous breakdown and all the effects that it does on his family, and it was devastating.
RBS says it can't comment on specific cases, but putting aside money to compensate businesses that fell into GRG was one of the factors cited by the bank today for its £7 billion loss. Another year, another miserable performance from RBS, this time racking up a further £7 billion in losses. But yet again, the bank's boss is promising a brighter future for this bank lies just around the corner. But haven't we heard that before? The truth is, with numerous fines for misconduct still to be settled, both here and in the US, there can be no guaranteed end in sight. In fact, the only guarantee is more pain to come. Pain that is beginning to get awkward for the boss supposedly brought in to return the bank to profits.
A $2 billion loss last year, $7 billion loss today. This is a bank that appears to be getting worse under your watch, not better.
Look, it's always disappointing to put such a huge loss out into the marketplace, but underlying there were 10.3 billion of one-off hits that this bank has taken for conduct, litigation, issues of the past.
You can't confidently sit here and say that 10.3 billion draws a line under it, can you?
No, but that's why we've said we believe this bank will be back into profit for the year 2018. We've got a core bank here that is this last year made £4.2 billion pre-tax. What's the problem with this bank is we've continued to have to look back and solve the issues from the past.
What I'm hearing is that 2017 is going to be another painful year for RBS potentially.
It could well be. That's why we're signalling back into profit in 2018.
But if those profits do arrive, they'll come at a cost. £2 billion of restructuring to be precise, or code for job losses.
We do need to get this bank back into shape. And yes, there will be job cuts, and there will be cuts in properties. There will be job cuts.
But you won't put a figure on it?
No, I won't.
But we're talking thousands, aren't we?
My policy is I talk to our staff before I talk to anybody about changes to what's going on in this organisation.
But other figures are uncomfortably clear. At the height of the financial crisis, we, the taxpayer, paid £45 billion to bail out RBS, and today we own a 73% stake. At the time, we paid just over £5 per share. Today, the company is worth just £2.38. Just breaking even on this enormous investment seems a long way off, let alone making a profit.
Given everything that we're hearing today, the fines, the size of the loss, was it appropriate, do you think, for your pay package to be $3.8 million for 2015?
You know, the pay package is negotiated, the board pay that out, but at the end of the day, my job is to create a really good bank here.
But you haven't yet done that, that's the point. So people see your pay package and think, well, hang on a minute, why is that pay package starting to creep up?
Look, I'll leave that with the board it's their process.
Exclude all the litigation, fines and restructuring. This is a bank that made $4 billion profit last year. The problem is, with the past a recurring nightmare for RBS, the future of this bank is still far from certain.
Siobhan Kennedy. After the break, what happens to critics of the president in the Philippines? Duterte's leading opponent, Leila de Lima, was arrested this morning, accused of drugs charges. She says it's a fit-up. We're in Manila to find out more. Well, Donald Trump might want his opponents to shut up, but in the Philippines, they risk getting locked up. This morning, President Duterte's highest-profile critic, opposition leader Leila de Lima, was arrested on drug trafficking charges after an all-night vigil at her office. The senator has insisted there's no truth whatsoever to these allegations. From Manila, Here's Kieran Jenkins.
At 8 a.m. this morning, the war on drugs in the Philippines moved off the streets and into the corridors of power. This senator is the figurehead against President Duterte's drugs crackdown. She's about to be arrested as part of it.
Inosente po ako.
I am innocent, she says. There is no truth. It's all lies.
Senator,
what is your message to President Duterte? But this is Duterte sending a pretty potent message of his own.
The woman at the centre of this scrum is perhaps the most vocal critic of President Duterte, the most vocal critic of the Philippines police. She has been dragged out of the Senate in the Philippines today by the Philippines police.
The president predicted this day way back in October.
She will rot in jail. She will rot in jail. It's no bail.
Senator De Lima has been something of a long-term nemesis of Rodrigo Duterte, and in particular over his war on drugs, which has cost 7,000 lives, and which he's recently been forced to suspend. It was Leila De Lima, after all, who began a Senate inquiry into his deadly clampdown, before she was booted off it by Duterte supporters. The president then accused her of making a sex tape.
Every time I view the video, I lose my appetite.
And worse. As Justice Secretary, he said she extorted huge payments from drug lords detained at the notorious Bilbid prison, paid for by the sale of drugs inside. Hello. Hi. Just 2 weeks ago, she told me the president was out to destroy her.
He's so sick. He's sick-minded.
Last night, warrants were issued for her arrest. A crushing moment. I just want to be with my family, the senator said.
Ang aking pamilya.
Instead, she's here, being held behind locked doors beyond locked gates. All this right in the heart of police headquarters, now at the mercy of those she's been so outspoken against.
Now, those close to President Duterte say the fact that Senator De Lima is on this compound, behind bars with all these police around her, is very much a fulfillment of a campaign promise, a sort of Filipino version, if you like, of lock her up. But it also marks a pivotal moment for this country. Is this really the sort of place where political dissenters are thrown in jail?
Come in, please.
And this is the lawyer who led the campaign to put her there.
Oh gosh, there's Mr. Hitler.
Oh yes, don't mind that. I'm not a neo-Nazi, not by a long shot.
Yes, that is Hitler on the wall. He says he's a student, not an admirer of the Nazi leader.
Drug pushing is not a political crime. She is equating her incarceration for drug trafficking with an alleged attempt on the part of the administration to silence her.
As counsel for an anti-crime NGO, Ferdinand says he found the prisoners who testified against the senator.
Do you think they're honest people, the people who are testifying against Senator De Lima?
Well, people who have no reason to testify against Senator De Lima.
Do you think they're honest?
Yes, I think they're honest insofar as what they've witnessed.
They're convicted felons, they're in jail. You think they're honest?
Yes, I think they're honest because not because you're a convicted felon means you're going to make up stories about another person, especially a senator.
There's evidence from former officials too. It's not just her integrity on trial, but public life in the Philippines itself. Kieran Jenkins, Channel 4 News, Manila.
Tonight's main news. The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has rebuffed calls for him to resign after the party's crushing defeat in Copeland, an area it has held since the 30s.
You can keep in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, the whole shebang.
My God, what a thought. Something to do for the weekend. Thank you very much for watching. We'll be back tomorrow night at 6:30. Until then, have a wonderful evening.
Good evening.